Hey Phil, this is Cameron.
Hey, what's up, Cam?
Man, I gotta talk to you about something. Have you been watching the news?
Dude, what is going on? Pocket politics with Phil and Cam. Why? Why are we doing this?
I think it's gonna matter.
The only thing they want to talk about is guns and abortion.
My own views, I want to see the Republicans get away from the social issues.
I'm not saying that Republicans are idiots.
You hear something like that, it's powerful.
As an American, I was disgusted.
You could make the argument that you're probably more in the middle as well.
I think that's just a story that somebody's telling you.
Again, well, with the facts, this is true. Everybody knows
What
it.
facts?
So-
What facts? Who does this hurt more, Republicans or Democrats?
Boy, I've been thinking about that.
Welcome back to Pocket Politics. Cam, how was your week?
Mine was good. How about yours?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. Well, not too much in the news, but we've got enough to get into. Why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Yeah, so we're going to talk tonight about the Biden and his visit to the border. We're going to talk also about the president's classified documents that have cropped up and been all over the news. We're going to talk some about the House again. That's going to transition us to an update on George Santos. We're also going to have some Senate news. So we've got a few things to touch on in the U.S. Senate. And we're also going to talk about a U.S. citizen who was recently released from detainment in Russia. Phil, why don't you get us started with this border stuff and the president?
Yeah, so President Biden made his visit to the border. The Republicans have kind of been jeering him for a while for not having gone down there to see what is going on. So he goes down there and then receives a bunch of criticism. Of course, people saying that the border was sanitized so that he could see it, and the conditions were actually far better than what they were. The various other, criticisms, some of them you'll talk about here in a second. I just don't think this was going to work out for him either way, right? This was a lose-lose situation. Him going down there was not going to appease anything. It was not going to solve anything, most importantly. It's really just a chance for him to get eyes on exactly what's going on, and it kind of reminds me of a George W. Bush flying over New Orleans in a helicopter kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was going to be a tough situation for him to go into. I will give you that. I mean, I think you mentioned that he's faced a lot of pressure to go down there from certainly from Republicans, also, independents and such kind of in different polls have shown they've wanted more done with the border, right, wrong, or indifferent. So he's got all that going on. I do credit him for going down there, albeit I think he's, maybe a couple of years late, but still he did go down there. Once he gets down there, he met with Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, who handed him a letter. And Abbott said within that letter, he had 5 things in there that he thinks the president could be doing to better conditions on the border. And all 5 of those things, Governor Abbott said, are law that just need to be enforced. I don't know what the 5 things were. I haven't read the letter or anything like that. But so he's also taken criticism for who came and who didn't come, right, to this meeting now. And that's where, there were a number of Democratic congressmen there, along with the Democratic mayor of El Paso. No Republicans were with them, though. And one in particular that's being pretty vocal about it is Representative Tony Gonzalez down in Texas. He represents the 23rd district, and he's got a big chunk of that southern border in his district, which stretches from El Paso out to like central Texas. But regardless, he's saying, hey, I wasn't invited. I wanted to meet with the president. He went on Face the Nation last weekend and was pretty upset about it, kind of went on a rant. But regardless, Phil, I will say I'm disappointed that he didn't at least invite Representative Gonzalez there. I think the president had a lot to say about bipartisan stuff, the week before with his meeting at the bridge in Kentucky there that we talked about in our last episode. And I wish he would have continued that bipartisanship by bringing some Republicans, at least Representative Gonzalez there, who happens to be, the guy over the district where he was at.
Yeah, I don't really care about Representative Gonzalez. I'll tell you who I am disappointed that he didn't bring down there. was John Cornyn. And specifically because, at the very end of last year, John Cornyn specifically was working on immigration reform alongside Kristen Sinema. Granted, I don't really like either of them, but I feel like somebody that's willing and trying to work for solutions and stuff, and has actually shown that with their activity, because Cornyn and Sinema actually had immigration reform tenets in the omnibus spending bill that eventually had to get removed for passage. But I just think that somebody that's willing to work across party lines, and if I'm not wrong, I think this was still while Sinema was a Democrat too, so it was before she became an independent. So just that fact, I mean, I think I would have rather have seen him invited than Representative Gonzalez. But either way, I do wish he probably would have. It is a bipartisan issue. I think it deserves bipartisan support, especially when you're visiting. So I kind of understand your frustration on that. That being said, it should be noted that as a country, this is something we've largely complained about for a long time and have failed to do anything about. I mean, the last immigration reform was actually passed in 1986. So for people that are counting, that's effectively 40 years ago. And things change, right? It's a complicated problem. People on both sides of the aisle feel differently about it, but obviously we need to do something about it. And so, prior to this, prior to going down there, the White House kind of put forth some things in motion that should kind of help temporarily, but they are definitely not the large scale fixes that we need for this program. One of the things they did was they're expanding kind of a test program that they launched that it uses app-based applications for asylum, so that people can apply for asylum before hitting the border and trying to enter the border. It increases the amount of work visa applicants, which is much needed around the country, because we do need people to start, filling those migrant farm jobs, the random storefronts that have the help wanted sign up, even though we have record low unemployment, all those things. So initially that program was just open for Venezuelans, and we saw a 70% reduction in at the border asylum seekers from Venezuela. So now that is expanded to Nicaragua, Haiti, Cuba, and I think maybe one or two other countries, Cam. But really what we need is the House and the Senate and the president to all come together and get something done.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you that it's broken. I think, again, we do need to see the bipartisanship come through here. You mentioned Cornyn and Sinema. There's some Democrats that are working with them, as well as some other Republicans. And Sinema being an independent now, I guess, put her in that category. But Phil, have you heard any whisperings, or do you have any inklings that Senator Cornyn, Sinema, and some of these Republicans and Democrats in the Senate are going to continue with this issue into 2023? Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't, but I hope that they would. I think it's, if our elected officials are working on behalf of the people, they've got to understand that this is something that both sides of the aisle want. It's important to have recognition of the pathways to citizenship, right? Part of the problem is it's just so hard to do. It's also important to recognize the fact that there are other ports of entry and other ways that people get into the country besides the southern border, right? The southern border is not our only problem when it comes to immigration. We have a lot of people who are already in the country that are on expired work visas. We've got a huge problem with that. And then we've also got a problem, with people entering the country, drugs entering the country by our other ports, right? Including airports, shipping ports, things like that. So, it really is time for, bipartisan work to fix this problem, because it's not just a border issue. This is a immigration all across the board issue.
Yeah. And again, as you mentioned, the president went down there knowing he was going to certainly take some heat for the visit. The look probably didn't quite go the way he wanted it to. But that being said, it was really kind of just the start of what was a rough week for the president, Phil. he comes back and we start hearing all about some classified documents that were found in his possession. Do you got some news for us on this?
Well, just to be clear, they weren't really in his possession, you know.
Well, okay, but you're right, they weren't. But still, classified documents surrounding him.
Yeah, so on the heels of the beginning of the week, you know, he's doing this this border visit. You know, there's a couple polls that ended on the 12th of January that had him at a 47 and a 48% approval rating. So his numbers were up. I doubt they stay there or keep going in a positive direction for him, because it comes out that they had classified documents that were located at the Penn Biden Center, which was largely an office space that they used to work while he was not the vice president or the president, but that period in between. And then later that week, we learned that there were other documents that were found in a garage at his personal residence in Delaware.
Yeah, I mean, the Delaware ones, I mean, there's actually been two batches or two different groups of documents found there. But going back to his, you know, the ones that were found in his old office, I mean, those were actually discovered on November 2nd. We just learned about them recently. It looks like the ones in his residence in Delaware were actually discovered in December 20th, actually. And again, we just kind of find out about this now. But I mean, with all that being said, right, I mean, then we find out here midweek about, like I said, more documents being found at that Delaware residence. You know, all of this, right, drove the Department of Justice, right, Merrick Garland, to actually appoint a special counsel, this gentleman named Robert Hur, to go ahead and investigate. And I'll be honest with you, I think Merrick Garland did the right thing there, and I think he was shrewd in who he appointed. Robert Hur was a Trump-appointed judge, so I think he did probably the right thing from an optics standpoint on doing that by putting Hur in place there. Phil, don't you kind of think Merrick Garland's hands were tied? He had to do that.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I think it's good the way he went about it. I don't necessarily think his hands were tied, but I think it was a good decision, right? He knows that he's going to be scrutinized regardless of that, because he was appointed by President Biden. So it's better just optics for him to appoint a special prosecutor, and it gives the, you know, semblance of fairness, right? While there is very little that is similar between this classified documents case and the Trump Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. One similarity is that, you know, he appointed a special prosecutor for the Trump classified documents case. So he's putting somebody specially in charge of the Biden classified documents. But at the end of the day, the optics are really bad. You know, he's got some time left for people to kind of forget about this. I don't know that the right-wing news media is going to allow people to. But the other issue is that he doesn't have time to build, you know, to do progress that would kind of put this thing in the past, right? He doesn't have the House, so he's not going to be able to pass big landmark or sweeping legislation unless it's something that is very much bipartisan. And that's going to hurt him, because this is basically the thing that people are going to remember the next time they go to the ballot box.
Well, I mean, you know, you mentioned it, right? This is not a good look for him. But, you know, you talk about not having the House and the Senate. I think Biden's best thing he can do is what you just mentioned a minute ago. He's not going to get much done unless it's bipartisan. Well, you know, there's narrow margins in the Senate as well, so he's going to need bipartisan stuff. I mean, if he wants legislation, probably his shrewdest move would be to get with some of the moderates and try and see what they can come up with to try and get things through. That remains to be seen whether that happens or not. But, I mean, that's probably his best option right now, to try and get some of that stuff, or to try and get some legislation going. Going back to the documents themselves, you know, I'll just say this. I'm not trying to compare what he has with what President Trump had. I'm not trying to compare those. I mean, certain people are, and contrast them, whatever. I'm not trying to go down that road. I'm just going to say, in general, I'm disappointed with how classified documents seem to be handled. I don't know the extent of these documents, what all was found there. Obviously, it's classified stuff. I am hearing there is some top secret stuff. I've also heard there's some stuff that was probably a pretty low classification, but nevertheless, I am disappointed kind of in this, how this is all going about. I think not only myself, but I think Americans in general would like to feel better about how classified information, i.e. government secrets, are being safeguarded and held.
Yeah, and so for the listeners that we have that maybe aren't exposed to classified information, there's a couple things that I'll add to that. Is one, I agree, right? Like this should be a much safer like a much safer process than it is apparently, right? Especially at these high levels. You and I have said before, if we handled certain things in certain ways, we would definitely like find ourselves in significant trouble. But it's kind of, we've been doing this long enough. We've seen plenty of circumstances where classified material is handled improperly. Not saying that's okay. It's definitely not acceptable. But there also should be, some consideration given to, the fact that Biden seemed to be forthright about this. Him and his legal team, kind of came out, notified the National Archives almost immediately upon discovering this stuff. While we didn't find out about it immediately, they apparently did that and have been cooperating in full. They did not claim to, declassify it with their thoughts or basically, it doesn't appear that he stole it, which it does appear in the case of the former president. But yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of dynamics to this. Like I said, if you are a listener who is not exposed or adept in handling classified documents, just know it is very dynamic. There's a lot of details to it. I always joke about the fact that unclassified is still a classification, right? So unclassified documents are actually classified. Even though that's kind of a joke on my behalf, it just goes to show how dynamic of a thing this is.
Yeah, and it's going to be something I think that's going to haunt him, for a while now going forward. I mean, I will tell you this much. I mean, you talk about the optics of all this. I will say this: when the president is probably facing a rough week and in a tough time here, when MSNBC and CNN are talking about this almost nonstop. And CNN and MSNBC by no means are right-leaning networks. So, and his press secretary was getting beat up, not just by like Ducey from Fox and some of the usual ones that are tough on her. She was getting beat up by NBC News correspondents who were trying to push her on the issue, and she was not holding her own very well. So this is something that the Biden White House is definitely going to have to work with, and it's going to be tough for him to recover, I think, from this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And like I said, I just don't think he's going to be able to do the kind of things as president that would kind of wash this over. I heard something that CNN had like 2 straight hours of coverage on it the first day that we learned about this, which is not a good look. It's like, so even if you're not a fan, or if you are a fan, you're not quite a fan of this, which is kind of like, I get it. I'm sure it's a problem that's way more pervasive than this, and we just don't hear about it regularly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The thing about that, though, Phil, I was just going to say really quick, is we don't hear about. The thing about it is we heard so much about it now with the Trump stuff earlier this year, or this past year, I guess I should say. We're in 2023 now, but this past year we heard so much with the Trump stuff that now it's like all over the news, and now it's, oh no, here we go, classified documents again. So yeah, it's out there and it's in the news. So,
but we did get some work actually being accomplished. Some bipartisan, and by bipartisan, I'm referring to both sides of the Republican Party in the House, are back at it. They were able to pass a rules package on Monday morning. So we got that. Rules include gutting the House Ethics Committee, amongst other stuff, and then also assigning people to the committees this week. You got anything to get us started on that?
I mean, Again, not a whole lot. I mean, I get it. There's all this drama being made, on again these different news networks about, oh no, the House, the House, the House. I mean, look, they're literally just getting started. Yes, they passed the rules package. All but one Republican voted for their rules package. The lone holdout, we said his name earlier in the show, was Tony Gonzalez. But and he simply said he had concerns about military budget or something in there. But whatever. I mean, again, let them legislate, let them lead. They're getting their committee assignments sorted out. I don't think they've got all the committees yet put in place. But I mean, at the end of the day, again, let them lead. I mean, they've got some bills. I think, Phil, we're going to talk about here, stuff with the IRS agents, a couple of abortion bills that, quite honestly, may look good on paper to some people. They were largely symbolic because a lot of the stuff we've been seeing has no chance of getting anywhere in the Senate. So, I mean, kind of like other bills that Democrats and Republicans both do this in the House because they know they can get it through with a simple majority to, if nothing else, show their voters and say, look, we did something. No one else did, but at least we did something. And this is an age-old tactic the House likes to do. So, again, narrow margins there. Expect to see some of this over the next couple of years. But I said it last week, and I'm going to say it again. Let them legislate. They've got the House. The country chose to put them there. Let's see what they can do.
Yeah, so you mentioned the two abortion bills. I mean, they're clearly listening to the voters on this one, right? Because the voters were asking for, bills that don't do anything, if not just talk about anti-abortion stuff.
Well,
so
that
the
I
first
will.
one,
So that I will. Okay, the abortion ones I will say. You've heard. I mean, I've said this many times. This is an issue that they are behind on. The thing is, though, I think they took so much money from evangelical churches and this, that, and the other that I think they're getting so much pressure now that not only was Roe v. Wade overturned, but now they want more and more and more, and so they're kind of squeezing them into a corner on that. So. I'm with you. It's probably not going to be very good for them long term, but they're I guess doing what they can with a group that they have been in bed with for a number of years.
yeah. So just to break it down, the first bill, largely symbolic. Again, it's not going to go anywhere, but it basically states that doctors that give birth must try and resuscitate a child or a baby that is given birth after or as part of a failed abortion. I heard a stat that less than 1% of abortions that occur after 21 weeks. And then of all of those that occur after 21 weeks, only less than 4% of those result in this kind of a circumstance. And then, as it turns out, it's already actually a law that they have to do this anyway. So what this bill is trying to achieve, we don't really know. It's more just pure symbolism.
It's
the second
what I
thing
said.
is
Yeah, these are, like I said earlier, these are just literally just this is very classic House stuff. Please go on, but I mean, this stuff is
I'm
just,
agreeing with you.
It's purely symbolic.
Yep, I'm agreeing with you. The second one is just, it's not even like really legislation. It's just more of saying we will crack down harder on people that protest and damage people or property outside or at pro-life healthcare centers. Again, complete symbolism. It's not going to go anywhere anyway because it won't get through the Senate. And then finally, you mentioned the IRS stuff. So there's a little bit of churn in that. It's the 87,000 IRS agents that, are being hired over the next 10 years. And some of those are just to replace people who are leaving anyway. They are going to try and repeal that and stop that hire. Just kind of interesting, though. Cam, do you know how much these changes to the IRS are actually costing or projected to cost based on the CBO?
I know what the left-leaning media is saying, but I will tell you that the number you're about to read 100% depends on what news station you're watching. Go ahead and read it, but I mean, I will tell you
the Congressional Budget Office actually said that this costs $78 billion,
yeah,
right, over the next 10 years. And that includes, like I said, because these agents are being hired over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, here's my 2 cents on that. I'm sure the IRS, like most
Can your
government.
2 cents hold on for just a second?
Okay. Do you have more numbers to read? I mean,
Yeah, so the CBO is also saying that this is projected to bring in over 116 billion of unpaid taxes. And so what the Congressional Budget Office is saying, which I'll for our listeners who may not know, is a bipartisan committee of finance, accountants, economists, etc. What they're saying is that this is actually going to reduce the debt over time as opposed to increasing it.
okay, my 2 cents. I don't believe a whole lot of that. Here's what I do know. 87,000 agents are being hired by the IRS. If it's like any other government agency, they are probably bloated to begin with. Do you really think we need to be hiring all these extra agents and people that are going to go roaming the countryside? I say that jokingly because I don't think they're going to roam the countryside, but still, I'm not a fan of this 87,000 hiring. It is this thing was rammed through that Inflation Reduction Act, some more stuff that was tacked in on there, and I'll be honest with you, I that thing was so partisan that's why I say it depends on what side of the aisle you're on. But I will tell you, there are Americans all over the country cheering about this, and many of them. And I will tell you that again, this all depends on what side of the aisle you sit on. You and I are going to disagree with it. I'm sure disagree on this. But you know what? Whether you or I agree with it or disagree with it, it doesn't really matter because this isn't getting through the House. So again, a symbolic thing. The voters did believe strongly in this because this was something the Republicans ran hard on. And again, they won the House. So it is what it is. I may not be a fan of it. You may be a fan of it. But you know what? It's not going anywhere. So I don't even think we need to keep spinning our wheels on this.
Well, so one thing I will say is that I honestly am kind of a fan of it, and I'll tell you why. Is I read a thing the other day saying that there's currently on a year by year basis $1.6 trillion in unpaid taxes. And so if there's any way we can get some or most, if not all of those $1.6 trillion back, I think that that's a good thing.
Again, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, of that 1.6 trillion, they're saying that almost 50% of that is 2% of the country, the top 2% of the country. Now, again, I will agree with you. There are things that are flawed about the IRS that I'm not happy with. I would go for overhauling the tax system and changing things up. In general, I think it's way too complicated. The fact that we have to, that a lot of people in the country have to hire an accountant to fill out paperwork to tell them how much they owe to the government when magically the government already seems to know anyway, blows my mind, right? Like I don't understand why that's a thing. But as far as collecting unpaid taxes that can be used to fund education and fund healthcare and different things like that, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I can only imagine what the Democrats would love to do with sucking up more tax dollars, but that's my 2 cents on this. Again, you and I are going to disagree on this one, I'm pretty sure, but here's my 2 cents on this. I will say this about, I keep saying 2 cents. Here's more of my opinion. I do think the House has been working to actually get things, some bipartisan things done this week, which is good. One of the things they've got is a bipartisan select committee on U.S. competition with China. That has been voted on and is now a thing. And we'll see how that works going forward and how we can kind of work on, work on just China and that monster that's over there. I say monster, that kind of growing threat that we have over there. We'll see. We'll see how this can work out. There's been some other bipartisan things that were done. There was also some bipartisan news out there about some strategic oil reserves that had been sold to China, that was something that the House has voted on. No more of that. They're trying to push forward legislation that's going to stop us from still selling strategic oil reserves to many other nations besides China. I think that's a good thing. when we start hearing about that. And there was a lot of Democrats joined every Republican on that strategic oil reserve vote. I think there was, I don't have the stat in front of me anymore, but I think it was like 3 something to only like 97 holdouts on it or whatever. But anyway, bipartisan work there. Phil, I think those are a couple of good things coming out of the House, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And but the one thing that I am not seeing coming out is that they ran really strongly on 3 main things, right? They ran really strongly on crime, immigration, and inflation, and we have yet to see.
Okay.
Did
2
mention
weeks
any
into
one of
this,
those things.
I got it. 2 weeks into this thing, blah blah blah. Okay, but guess what? They are working to do some things. Give them time on that. Here's something else that I think was good, that I think was actually really good, and I think you would agree with me, as would many of the American public, and that is there is some bipartisan effort to try. Now I say try and put forward a bill to limit stock trading by members of Congress. This has been something they've tried before, going back to 2020, and it hasn't really gone anywhere. This is Democrat Abigail Spanberger out of Virginia, Republican Chip Roy out of Texas are putting this through. Again, this is their 3rd time doing it. But there's a 2022 analysis that was done by the New York Times. It says 20% of members of Congress trade stock when there's a conflict of interest at heart. And so what these representatives, Spanberger and Roy, are saying is that, look, we sit in classified, meetings and meetings with CEOs and all these other people. And, why should then somebody that sits in on these briefings be able to turn around and buy stock or trade their stock, sell it off, whatever? So they're trying to put forth effort there. Now, that's going to meet a lot of resistance, though, don't you think, Phil? Because there's a lot of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle that are heavy in the stock trading with this stuff.
So I one agree that this is something that just should be this should just be a law, right? Like you shouldn't be able to have conflicts of interest in this way and be able to potentially profit off of knowing information that not everybody knows, right? It's a clear violation. Normal people would be subject to insider trading crimes. They'd find themselves in a cell next to Martha Stewart for doing this kind of stuff. But do I think it's going to get to a vote, let alone pass? Probably not. Why?
No.
Because a number of them have been doing this anyway.
Yeah,
and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I'll say this too. Something that's kind of interesting about this bill is this proposed bill, if you will, is something that there's actually interest in some members of the far left side of the Democratic Party, just like there's interest on the far right side of the Republican Party, and then there's interest in the middle. So this seems to be something that's kind of across various, political ideologies within the House. There are people that are backing this or that say they would like to see this. So it's interesting to see a bill like this getting the support from different areas. However, you just said it, Phil, there's a number of them that are doing this, both sides of the aisle, and that have profited heavily on this. So I agree with you. While it looks good, and I think it's interesting that there is some movement, and I do applaud, the people that are trying to push this. I agree with you, Phil. This probably doesn't even get a vote.
Yeah. Now, with that being said, before we move on to kind of our next subtopic, it should be noted that Janet Yellen came out and stated that it looks like we will reach the debt ceiling on Thursday. Does this mean we're going to have an action-packed week ahead?
Probably, and we'll see. We'll tackle that when it comes up. I did hear that, though, so I think we'll see probably a whole bunch of stuff this week, talking about the debt ceiling and everything else. That's certainly going to be a thing in the weeks coming forward. So, yes, I do think it's going to be action-packed, but I also say we tackle that monster when it gets here. I would like to just transition, though, now from the House to the Senate. And we've got some news coming out of there, starting with the state.
Real quick, though. Hey, real quick before we can't glaze over that one more detail in the House. As Reed Galen from the Lincoln Project called him, the lying liar who lies, George Santos made a little bit of news this week as well, Cam.
Oh, he did. You're right. Thanks for stopping me from transitioning to the Senate there so quickly. George Santos did. I mean, this is like a weekly update with this guy. I mean, so just for our listeners, this week on the George Santos update, now he's got calls from the Nassau County GOP to resign. Nassau County being the county in his district. There's another Long Island GOP group that's calling for this guy to resign. 5 or 6 different House members this week, Republican House members, have called for his resignation, to include Nancy Mace of South Carolina, and Nick Langworthy in New York, and some others, as I mentioned. Look, I said it last week. I don't think this guy's going to last his whole term. I'll say it again. This guy's getting a lot of pressure. I mean, there's more allegations coming out about this guy now. In 2019, he was using a alias, different name to try and recruit, I think, transgender voters to the Republican Party. I don't even think anybody knows who this man is at this point. I mean, he may be some imposter from somewhere else posing as George Santos. I really don't know. This guy, I just feel we're going to go round and round with this guy.
Yeah, so he used an alias, Anthony DeVolder, which is, DeVolder is also the name of the company that allegedly, or not that allegedly, but that did pay his campaign, or paid him the $750,000, of which he made a $700,000 campaign donation to himself. So we will see. It looks like the pace is quickening on campaign finance violations. And then just other pressures from the fact that he is lying too much. I mean, Nancy Mace, certainly not the only person that has kind of gone after him. There was that high-profile Tucker Carlson interview with him, as well as various other things. And he just, he's not answering questions from reporters. It's just going to spin out of control. I could almost... I don't know at this point. Last week I said I think he makes it his whole 2 years. If not, I don't think it's going to be the House Republicans that drum this guy out. I just don't think they're going to do that. He's not going to resign, right? He's shown no ability to kind of cater to what people actually want, because he has to lie about everything, so that people would actually want him. So I don't think he's going to resign, and unless he's like forced to or something, I think that it's going to be up to an election 2 years from now. I mean, the Republicans are willing to deal with it if it brings them an extra vote and that much more security in the House.
So, I mean, I will say this again. You talked about Nancy Mace. There's a number of Republicans around the country pushing on this guy. I think he's going to cave in, and I think he is going to resign. You talked about, McCarthy's not pressuring him. I mean, at the end of the day, he's going to play politics, right? He's got a really narrow margin in the House. I mean, yeah, he's going to worry about that seat. But I'll say this. I don't know that he needs to worry. I think the Republicans could win that seat back in a special election. And I'll tell you why. Because, in 2020, the district that Santos represents went for Biden by, I want to say, like 8 points. And in 2022, it took a dramatic shift. I mean, Lee Zeldin, the Republican running for governor, he won that district by 12 points. Santos won it by 8. And the Republican challenger to Chuck Schumer, I don't even remember the guy's name. He's someone no one had ever heard of because he was running against Chuck Schumer in New York. I think it was like Jim Pinion or something. But anyway, this guy even won the district by 4. Now, granted, Schumer won most of a lot of other parts of New York, but still, I think this is a seat that the Republicans could probably win back in a special election. McCarthy's playing politics, but I think Santos is going to resign. I said it last week. I'm going to say it again. We're going to hear more bizarre things about this guy, but go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I understand how the regular voting was, but also keep in mind that the Democrats have had an election for at least 4 or 5 years in special elections. So they do tend to do better in special elections than Republicans do.
Yeah, I mean, they have done okay in special elections as of late. But again, I think it'd be competitive out there. But regardless, right, he's going to have to step down or get forced out before it even comes to that. Like I said, I think it's I think it's coming. I disagree with you on that I think he's going to step down at some point. But before we do get to the Senate news, I did want to throw one more thing out there about George Santos that I heard this week. Phil, did you know that he was, or so he claims, one of the first people in the country or in that very first wave of people to catch COVID-19?
No, but it whatever at this point, like who cares what this guy says at any point,
well,
you know?
Well, going back to this though, it's this COVID-19 thing. Everything is under question with this guy. That when that came up this week, people are like, how do we know that's even true? I just yeah, so much wild stuff on him. But enough on Mr. Santos. I'm sure we'll talk more about him next week and in the weeks to come. I want to transition to some Senate news here. Phil, I want to start by going out to the state of California and looking at that Senate race out there, Dianne Feinstein's seat. Now, Senator Feinstein has not announced her intentions yet to retire or anything of that nature, but she is 89 years old. Some people have called into question her health as of late. So there's a lot of speculation that in 2024, Senator Feinstein may not run for another term. And so we have Representative Katie Porter, who has now announced that she is going to get in the race to try and run for that seat along with some others.
Yeah, so interesting. You know, I know you are probably not, but I actually am a kind of a Katie Porter fan. And I think if she does, she stands a pretty good chance. You know, she's got a pretty good background as a teacher and a lawyer, really good education history. She runs in a district in California that is very much a swing district. It's in Orange County, which has splotches of very red in there. And she wins as a progressive. So I think she definitely stands a chance. You know, hopefully, you know, the goings on between her and Feinstein are cordial. As you mentioned, you know, when they asked Dianne Feinstein, she kind of just said, it's okay. Like everybody, you know, should get the opportunity to run if they want to, or something along those lines. But I think Katie Porter would be a good addition to the U.S. Senate in a state like California. And there's also some others, too, as well, right?
Yeah, so Representative Barbara Lee, while she hasn't come out and announced a run, there's a lot of whisperings that she will or that she is interested in throwing her name in the hat. She represents a district around Oakland. I think it actually incorporates Oakland and then the county there that's in, which is called Alameda County. So she represents a chunk of that. Again, she's been a longtime representative. She's pretty progressive. She's spoken out very strongly against war in general, the Iraq War, etc. She's also not a big supporter of military funding, or you know, trying to tame that, or I shouldn't say tame, but she's been one that's wanted to slash military funding, it looks like, over the years. But nevertheless, Representative Lee rumored to get in there. I'm also hearing rumors Adam Schiff and California Attorney General Rob Bonta may be interested in jumping in the ring as well. I think it's going to be probably a hard fought, crowded primary for this one. At the end of the day, though, this is California, and whoever wins that primary, I'm pretty certain is going to win that Senate seat, because this is blue California. So again, we'll see. We mentioned some names here. There's probably going to be some more jump in the ring here in the coming months and ahead. So we will certainly stay on top of it and let you know what we see. And when we hear about it, we'll relay it on to you. There's some other Senate news as well. I wanted to go to West Virginia for just a minute. None of this is official, but I am hearing whisperings that the West Virginia Governor Jim Justice may be wanting to jump in the Senate race out there in West Virginia. And that's a notable race because that is Joe Manchin's seat that is up for grabs in 2024. Jim Justice being the governor there in West Virginia that was a Republican, and then he was a Democrat, and now I guess he's a Republican again. So he just kind of goes back and forth by what party he's in, but assuming he'll stay Republican to take on either Manchin or that seat. Phil, I find this kind of interesting out there, especially considering we don't know what Manchin's going to do yet.
Yeah, and we will certainly see. It wouldn't surprise me if Manchin is getting ready to kind of retire and hang his hat up. at the same time, though, you talk about these Democratic primaries in California. Wouldn't it be nice to have ranked choice voting in California so we could see this thing play out?
Well, I think it would be nice to see ranked choice voting all over the country.
Yeah,
kind
I
of,
know, I agree.
I'm actually kind of intrigued by that, seeing how it's worked up in Alaska and how it's worked in Maine, et cetera. But yeah, I think West Virginia is an interesting one to definitely keep an eye on. Again, none of that is official on Governor Justice, just some whisperings I've heard, and I thought I would share it with our listeners. One other piece of Senate news I wanted to touch on too is in the state of Nebraska. Senator Ben Sasse officially resigned this past week in a step down. The Nebraska governor has appointed former Governor Pete Ricketts to fill that seat. Ricketts is going to serve the next 2 years of it until 2024, at which point there will be a special election he or someone is going to have to run in. And then finally, that seat will come up for its regular slotted election in 2026. So I guess, again, Nebraska's already got the seat filled. We'll keep an eye on it. But Nebraska's a fairly red state, so most likely that will stay in Republican hands. So some Senate news there. Again, I'm personally kind of sad to see Senator Sasse leave. Phil, I know you may not agree with him all the time politically, but I think you had some respect for Senator Sasse also, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, and he's one of the final holdouts of the people, the Republicans that really came out against, Trump and January 6th and that stuff. So a little disappointing to see that, the Republicans that, that you can actually have some respect for are leaving.
Well, again, I have respect for many of them, but that depends on the side of the aisle you're on. But I will say this to your point, Phil. You're right. Sasse and some others that have voted to impeach Trump, like Pat Toomey and some of those other ones, have now retired. So not all of them. I mean, Murkowski's still around in Collins, but it is interesting to see these guys either resigning or retiring. But on the Senate news, I think I want to transition here really quick and just talk about some other news. It's kind of flown under the radar, I should say, but I think it's worth mentioning because we have spent some time back in December talking about Americans that were detained overseas. And this past week, we got some news that a gentleman named Taylor Dudley, who was being held over there in Russia, he was released. Now, Mr. Dudley was a Navy veteran, a native of Michigan. Phil, I don't have a lot of details about what happened to this guy, but apparently he was over in Poland attending a music festival and then somehow crossed the border into Russia and then was detained. Do you have anything more on that?
So, I don't, but I will say that, people may not know, but European and, and borders around a large portion of the rest of the country are not really secure or monitored or anything like that, like they are we would like them to be, per se. And so it could have just been, maybe he had a rental car and he drives the wrong way down a road. Who knows? He was at a music festival. Maybe he just left and stumbled into Russia. I have no idea how that works, but I think it's certainly good news that prisoners held overseas are coming back,
Yeah, and I wanted to just kind of say, too, here that apparently former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson played a big factor in the release here. And I didn't know this, but apparently he was working to help negotiate Brittany Griner's release. He said he's working on Paul Whelan's. Apparently this is what he's doing now, is he's working. Former Governor Richardson is working on, trying to get Americans detained overseas back home. So I think this was kind of interesting that he helped negotiate this and that he's pushing on for this. This gentleman that was held for basically 9 months over there in Russia. But at the end of the day, we talked about it in one of our past episodes that we wanted to keep kind of beating the drum on this about Americans overseas. And so not only do we want to make people aware of those that are detained overseas, but also we think it's newsworthy when people are released. So I'm glad to hear Mr. Dudley was released and he is at least out of Russia now. So some good news there. Phil, anything else to add on Mr. Dudley or Americans detained overseas?
No, I don't think so. I think the one thing I would like to add is just for our listeners, we talk about it every week, so it's our usual, kind of call to action. But get out there, look us up on Facebook, Instagram. You can link to all that stuff from the website, pocketpolitics.co. If you have a question about something or just think something's interesting and want us to talk about it, you can send us an email at cameronandphil@gmail.com. And then you can also go to our YouTube channel and like and subscribe and watch our podcast there. Hopefully soon we'll have a video element, but right now it's just the audio with a picture of our logo. But we'll keep working on that to get a video element of the podcast up so viewers can see that. But yeah, please get out there, engage with us, and we look forward to having you as continued listeners.
Yeah, and I would like to add too, this past week we hit 100 followers on our Facebook page, so that seems to be growing, so we definitely do appreciate that. But with all that being said, this has been yet another good episode, and I think it's time to wrap it up here with our parting shots. Phil, do you want to go first this week?
Yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about it. But so scientists came out this week and because of the limitation of aerosols and various other atmosphere contaminants and things like that, it looks like that the hole in the ozone is actually getting smaller now. So some progress made there. They are projecting it to take about 40 years, but 40 years it will basically be reduced to an insignificant size or not there at all. So we've got that to look forward to. That's not a whole win for climate change, but that is somewhat of a win. So hopefully, they're attributing this to cooperation between countries around the world working together to eliminate global climate change. And this shows definitely a step in the right direction. So hopefully we have continued work across the countries of the world to get better at stuff like this. Cam, over to you.
All right. Well, speaking of nature and the great outdoors, I'll stay with that. So we oftentimes hear about people that have squirrels in their attics or raccoons that are on the top of their homes or tunneling into their garage or people finding snakes in their garage or mice in their kitchen cabinets, etc. We oftentimes hear about those, and wildlife experts get called out for those. However, there's a family in Connecticut that is basically one-upping all those people. Yes, this family in Plainville, Connecticut, has found they've got a black bear hibernating under their deck. So in late December, this family was out there, I guess, running around in their backyard when their dog started growling and making some strange sounds, only to have the family peer or somebody from the family peer underneath that deck, and sure enough, there was this giant male black bear. Now, Connecticut wildlife authorities were called, and they basically came out, took a look at the situation, and said, one of two things that we can do. We can either make a whole bunch of noise and harass the bear and try and wake it up and get him out from under your deck, or we can just let him sleep and let him wake up in the springtime and amble off. And so the family decided to just go with the latter and let the bear sleep under there. And apparently now this bear is becoming famous, and there's I guess he's got social media pages of his own. TikTok videos are going up of him, showing him sleeping under there, etc. He's got, like I mentioned, social media accounts, Instagram and all that. But yeah, the bear is just sleeping under there, doing his thing. Hopefully in the springtime when he awakes, he just leaves and doesn't do any real damage there. But nevertheless, he is sleeping away safe and sound as we speak. So, Mr. Bear, hopefully you're resting well. The spring will be here before you know it. So, with all that being said, I think that about wraps it up this week. Phil, is there anything else you want to add before we sign off?
No, I think that's it. So, good episode this week, and we'll see you guys back next weekend for the next episode.
All right, until next time.
All right, bye.